Jackson Hale had always been a man who kept to himself. People who saw him riding across the open frontier often wondered how a person could live with so much silence around him. But for Jackson, silence was a friend. He had grown used to long roads, dusty trails, and wide skies that stretched forever. His life had never been crowded with friends or family. Instead, it was filled with the rhythm of hooves, the sound of wind brushing across the plains, and the quiet thinking that came from years of being alone. He wasn't unfriendly, just distant. He carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had faced many hardships and learned to stand on his own. The lines on his face weren't from age but from experience. The slight squint in his eyes came from staring across long distances while guiding cattle, scouting new trails, or watching storms form on the horizon. His clothes were worn but neat, his boots held the shape of long journeys, and his hat shaded a pair of deep, thoughtful eyes that rarely showed emotion. Jackson wasn't the type of man who liked being told what to do. Maybe it was because he had grown up without much stability. Life had tested him early. As a child, he had watched people make promises they didn't keep. Neighbors came and went. Friends drifted away. Folks moved on whenever times got rough, leaving him to learn that depending on others usually led to disappointment. So, he built his strength quietly, teaching himself skills most boys his age never learned. By the time he reached adulthood, he knew how to handle cattle, face unpredictable weather, repair anything with a piece of rope and patience, and survive with only the bare essentials. Despite all this, Jackson never carried bitterness. He simply accepted that life was easier when you didn't expect too much from anyone. He preferred a small circle, sometimes just himself and his horse. And his horse, a steady brown mare named Willow, had been with him for years. She understood him better than most people did. When he spoke to her, it was usually short and simple. But Willow always seemed to listen. One early morning, as the sky brightened with golden light, Jackson rode into a new frontier town. He wasn't searching for anything special, just temporary work, a bit of rest, and a place to refill supplies. Towns like this always popped up along the edges of the frontier. Some were lively with shops, inns, and families. Others were quiet, holding only a few houses and a dusty main street. This town was somewhere in between, not too crowded but not abandoned either. Smoke rose from chimneys, horses tied outside shops flicked their tails, and locals wandered about with baskets or tools in their hands. The town felt warm, not in temperature but in spirit. As Jackson slowed his horse near the general store, a group of men sitting on a wooden bench glanced up at him. Men in frontier towns always looked at newcomers with curiosity, sizing them up. Jackson didn't mind. He nodded politely and stepped inside the store. The owner greeted him with a friendly wave and asked if he needed anything. Jackson replied in his usual calm voice, asking for a few supplies. While the owner gathered the items, Jackson listened to the chatter in the shop. It was mostly normal talk: weather, ranch work, stray cattle, but one name kept appearing in their conversations: Rhea Carson. He didn't know who she was, but every time her name came up, there was a certain tone in their voices, half admiration, half caution. One man described her as the toughest ranch owner in the region. Another said she worked harder than any man he had ever met. A third laughed and said no, Cowboy lasted long under her rules because she didn't let anyone slack off. Jackson didn't react to the comments, but he paid attention. He had traveled enough to know that when several people talked about someone with that much respect, there had to be something remarkable about them. When Jackson stepped back outside, a young boy carrying water slowed down to stare at him. "You new around here?" the boy asked. "Just passing through," Jackson replied. "You looking for work?" the boy continued. "Maybe. Then you should go to the Carson Ranch." The boy's voice carried a mix of excitement and warning. "But only if you're ready for real work. Folks say Miss Rhea doesn't take nonsense from anybody." Jackson gave a slight smile. He wasn't easily intimidated. "We'll see," he said. As the day went on, he walked around the town a little more. He enjoyed observing things quietly. In one corner, children played games with sticks drawn in the dirt. In another, a blacksmith hammered metal against an anvil, sparks dancing in the air. Near the market, people talked, bargained, and shouted greetings to one another. Then he heard a voice firm, confident, and slightly raised, but not out of anger. More like authority. It stood out above the usual chatter. Check the cattle. Make sure the younger ones are kept away from the crowded pen. And don't rush them. Move steadily. Jackson turned his head and saw a woman standing near a group of ranch hands. She wore sturdy clothes, her hair tied back in a simple braid, and her posture was straight and steady. Her eyes scanned the animals with sharp focus. She wasn't giving orders harshly. She simply spoke with clarity. As someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. This, surely, was Rhea Carson. For a moment, Jackson's steps slowed. He had met many ranch owners across the frontier, but none carried themselves exactly like her. There was a quiet strength in the way she stood, a certain confidence that didn't shout for attention but naturally received it. The ranch workers moved quickly when she spoke, not because they were afraid, but because they trusted her. Rhea didn't notice Jackson at first. She was too busy checking the livestock and making sure everything went smoothly. But even from a distance, Jackson could tell she was someone who didn't step back from challenges. She faced things head-on, and that was something he understood deeply. A man near Jackson whispered, "That's her. The woman who runs Carson Ranch." Jackson simply nodded. He wasn't usually curious about people, but for the first time in a long while, something about another person caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she carried responsibility without hesitation. Maybe it was the respect people had for her. Or maybe it was because she seemed as independent as he was, someone who also learned to rely on herself. Her glance finally swept toward him for a brief second. Not in a dramatic or slow-motion way. Just a simple, professional look over a stranger. But even that short moment felt like two strong personalities quietly acknowledging each other without words. Jackson didn't linger. Nor did he approach her. He had never been the type to interrupt someone's work or start a conversation without purpose. He turned away, walked back to his horse, and prepared to leave the town center. But as he tightened the saddle, part of him replayed that brief moment when he first saw her. People said Rhea Carson didn't bow to anyone, not in attitude, not in leadership, not in determination. And Jackson, a man who had spent his life depending on no one, wasn't used to meeting someone who carried the same fierce independence. He wasn't seeking change, but sometimes life brought you to places, or people, that challenged the path you thought you would always walk alone. And though Jackson didn't yet know it, stepping into that town on that quiet morning was the beginning of something he had never expected. Something that would test his patience, his pride, and the beliefs he had built his entire life around. For now, he simply took a deep breath, mounted his horse, and rode toward the open fields, unaware that the woman he had seen earlier would soon become the center of a story neither of them could have predicted. Rhea Carson had never asked for an easy life. In truth, she never expected one. She grew up on the open frontier, where challenges showed up like old neighbors often and without warning. But her father had taught her early that a person's strength wasn't measured by how loud they spoke or how tough they acted. It was measured by how well they stood their ground when life became difficult. Rhea carried those lessons with her everywhere she went. People in the region respected her name, but not because she tried to impress anyone. Rhea simply worked harder, longer, and smarter than most people around her. When she walked through the town or the market, people nodded at her with admiration. Some also stepped aside out of habit. Not because she scared them, but because she moved with purpose. And they didn't want to slow her down. Her ranch, the Carson Ranch, sat on a wide stretch of land a few miles outside the town. It had been in her family for generations, passed down from her grandparents to her father, and finally, to her. When her father grew older and weaker, Rhea had stepped up without hesitation. She learned everything: how to care for cattle, how to repair fences, how to manage workers, and how to keep the ranch running even in difficult seasons. She became the backbone of the place long before she officially took charge. Rhea's days began before sunrise. while others were still waking up. She was already walking the ranch with a notebook in her hand, checking on everything that mattered. She made lists of repairs, counted cattle, planned the day's work, and checked the weather. She believed in keeping things organized. Her father always said that a ranch ran smoother when the person leading it didn't leave anything to chance. Many cowboys had worked for her over the years. Some stayed, some left. Most left quickly, not because she was unfair, but because she expected people to give their best. Lazy work frustrated her. Careless mistakes annoyed her. And disrespect was something she never allowed on her land. She was calm with her workers, kind when needed, and patient with those who truly tried. But she didn't tolerate excuses, and she didn't let anyone think her being a woman meant she couldn't lead a ranch as well as any man. The first time she realized how differently people treated her was when she was younger. Her father had taken her to a cattle auction, and a group of experienced ranch hands had ignored her input simply because she was a girl. When they realized her judgment was better than theirs, they learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. That day shaped her. She understood that in the frontier, respect wasn't given freely. It was earned through actions, not words. From then on, she lived by that rule. One afternoon, after finishing her tasks for the morning, Rhea rode into town for supplies. The sun hung high in the sky, warming the dusty roads and making the shadows sharper. She guided her horse, Sage, with relaxed confidence. Her clothes were simple but practical: sturdy boots, worn gloves tucked in her saddlebag, and a hat that kept the sunlight off her face. She didn't dress to impress, she dressed to work. As she entered the market area, several people greeted her. "Afternoon, Miss Rhea. How's the ranch holding up? Need any help this week?" She answered each person politely, offering a small smile or a friendly nod. She wasn't overly expressive, but she wasn't cold either. She simply had a lot on her mind most days. At the livestock section, she noticed one of her workers struggling to guide a small group of cattle into a pen. The animals were restless, moving unpredictably. Without raising her voice, Rhea stepped forward and took charge. "Ease up," she instructed. "Move them slowly, not fast. Let them find the space on their own." Her voice was steady, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need force. The worker followed her directions, and soon the cattle settled into the pen without trouble. Rhea nodded approvingly and gave a few more instructions before turning away. It was at that moment she noticed a man standing near the edge of the market, watching calmly. She didn't recognize him, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of an experienced cowboy. He wasn't staring rudely or trying to get her attention, just observing with a thoughtful expression. For a brief second, their eyes met. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away and continued with her work. She had no idea that the man she'd seen was Jackson Hale, a cowboy with a reputation that stretched across many towns. And Jackson had no idea that the woman he was observing with interest would challenge him in ways he had never experienced before. Later that day, Rhea visited the general store. She made a list of supplies she needed: tools, feed, and a few personal items, and discussed them with the owner. As she waited for him to gather everything, a couple of townspeople started talking nearby. "You hear? That Jackson Hale is in town," one of them said. "They say he's one of the best cowboys on the frontier." Rhea didn't react, but she heard every word. "I heard that too," the second replied. "But even he might think twice before working at the Carson Ranch." Rhea smiled faintly but didn't turn toward them. She had never cared much about a person's reputation. She judged people by how they acted, not what was said about them. If this cowboy named Jackson was as skilled as people claimed, she would find out for herself. If he wasn't, she would find that out even faster. When she finished her shopping, she rode back to her ranch, thinking about the days ahead. The season was demanding, and she knew she needed more capable hands. The work was too heavy for her small team to handle alone. Still, she refused to hire anyone who thought they could step onto her land and act like they knew better than her. A few hours later, after tending to her animals and checking the ranch's boundaries, Rhea stood outside her barn, watching the sky slowly change color. The sunset painted the horizon with shades of orange and pink, It was one of the few moments each day when she allowed herself to rest quietly. She thought about the stories people told about her. Some said she was too strict. Others said she was strong enough to run a ranch better than most men. Some whispered that she was impossible to impress. She didn't worry about any of those things. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply doing what needed to be done. Her father's old words echoed in her mind. Strength isn't about showing off. Strength is doing what's right, even when no one is watching. She lived by those words every day. As she stood there in the soft evening light, she felt a calm sense of pride in the life she had built. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was hers, and she protected it fiercely. She didn't know that somewhere in town, Jackson Hale was thinking about her too. He was trying to understand why a single moment, a simple look, had stayed with him longer than he expected. The frontier was wide and full of surprises, and soon, their paths would cross again. Not as strangers glancing from a distance, but as two strong individuals whose lives were about to intertwine in ways neither of them could have predicted. For now, Rhea Carson simply walked back toward her home, unaware that the next chapter of her story was already on its way, carried quietly by the footsteps of a cowboy she had yet to truly meet. The next morning began like any other on the frontier. But for Jackson Hale, something felt a little different. He woke early, as always, letting the quiet morning air settle around him. Willow, his horse, snorted softly and nudged his shoulder as if reminding him it was time to start the day. He patted her gently and began packing his things. He had spent the night in a small cabin offered by a local rancher. And though he appreciated the shelter, he wasn't planning on staying long. Still, something kept him from riding out of town right away. Without trying to explain it to himself, he found his steps turning in the direction of the Carson Ranch. Maybe it was because he'd heard the townfolk speak about it. Maybe it was because he had seen Rhea the previous day and sensed a strength in her that not many people carried. Or maybe he simply needed work, and hers was the only ranch hiring. Whatever the reason, he let his instincts lead him. The path to the Carson Ranch was long and surrounded by quiet fields. The grass swayed gently in the morning breeze, and birds moved in small flocks across the sky. The ranch came into view slowly, starting with the tall wooden gate, then the barns, and finally the house. Even from a distance, Jackson could see the place was well cared for. The fences were sturdy, the land neatly organized, and the animals looked healthy. It was clear someone ran the ranch with strong, steady hands. As he rode closer, he spotted Rhea Carson standing near the corral, checking the horses. She held a clipboard, making notes while a few ranch hands prepared the morning feed. She didn't seem surprised when she noticed Jackson riding up. She simply stepped forward and waited for him to approach. "You're the cowboy who came to town yesterday," she said in her steady voice. Jackson nodded. "Name's Jackson Hale. I heard of you," she replied calmly, though she didn't say whether it impressed her or not. "You looking for work? Or just passing through?" Jackson thought for a moment. He never liked committing to anything too quickly, but something in her tone told him she didn't want complicated answers. "I'm looking for work," he said simply. Rhea studied him for a short moment. She wasn't the type to judge someone quickly, but she also wasn't easily fooled. She had hired enough workers to know which ones came to work hard and which ones came only for easy wages. Jackson's quiet confidence told her he wasn't one to brag. His calm expression told her he didn't fear hard work, and the way he sat on his horse, balanced and steady, showed she was dealing with a man who knew ranch life well. "We can use help," she finally said. "But I don't tolerate laziness. If you take this job, you follow the rules of the ranch. No shortcuts. No arguments, without reason." Jackson raised an eyebrow slightly. He wasn't used to someone setting terms so firmly at the start. Most ranch owners begged skilled workers to stay, but Rhea acted like she didn't need anyone, like she was doing him a favor by offering the job. Maybe she was. "I can follow rules," Jackson replied. "As long as they make sense." Rhea's eyes narrowed just a little, not in anger, but in interest. "Then we'll see how you do." And just like that, Jackson joined the Carson Ranch. From the first hour, Rhea put him to the test. She gave him tasks that required strength, patience, and attention moving restless cattle, repairing loose fences, and training a young horse that didn't trust easily. Jackson did every task without complaint. But not without his own ideas. He had experience, and he wasn't shy about using it. "That fence should be reinforced differently," he said at one point. Rhea walked over and inspected it. "It's held fine for years. It won't hold this season," he said calmly. Rhea looked at him, not angry, just firm. "On my ranch, we fix things the way I decide, not the way someone else prefers." Jackson didn't argue further. But he didn't agree either. He simply nodded once, and finished the job exactly as she instructed. But Rhea was observant. Later, she checked the fence on her own. After examining it carefully, she adjusted the rail the same way Jackson had suggested without telling him. She wasn't stubborn for the sake of pride. She just didn't trust advice until she saw it for herself. As the day went on, the tension between them grew, not angry tension, but the kind that happens when two strong personalities meet. Jackson questioned things quietly, and Rhea answered firmly. Neither backed down easily. The ranch hands watched with curious eyes. They had never seen anyone talk to Rhea so calmly. Most men either backed off or tried to impress her. Jackson did neither. He simply spoke honestly and worked steadily. By midday, Rhea began to notice something unexpected. Jackson didn't slow down. He didn't make excuses, and he didn't show off. He simply worked with quiet focus, treating each task with care. She found herself watching him more closely, noticing the way he checked on the animals, the way he balanced patience with skill, and the way he handled challenges without frustration. He wasn't like the others who had worked for her before. In the afternoon, clouds began to gather in the sky. The ranch hands exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew sudden changes in weather could cause trouble on the open land. Rhea immediately put her team into action. "Bring the horses into the barn," she instructed. "Make sure the younger cattle stay near the shelter. And check the riverbank. Sometimes the water rises quickly." Jackson stepped forward. "I'll check the river." Rhea hesitated. It was a task she usually took herself, but something in Jackson's calm tone made her trust him. She nodded once. "Be careful. The ground can get slippery." Jackson mounted Willow and rode toward the river, noticing the wind growing stronger. When he reached the riverbank, he saw that the water was rising faster than expected. He assessed the situation carefully, then rode back to the ranch. "We need to move the cattle on the lower fields," he said. "The water might spread." Rhea didn't doubt him. She grabbed her hat firmly and called out instructions. The next hour was busy but organized. Rhea and Jackson worked side by side, guiding the animals to safer ground. The wind whipped around them, but they moved with steady calm. Rhea watched the way Jackson communicated with Willow, how he guided the cattle gently instead of pushing them too fast. Jackson noticed how Rhea kept checking on her workers, making sure no one was left behind. For the first time, they weren't clashing, they were working as a team. When the weather finally settled, the ranch stood safe, and the animals were secure. The workers gathered near the barn, relieved. Rhea brushed her hair back from her face and looked over at Jackson. "You made the right call," she said quietly. "So did you," he replied. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it was a meaningful one. It was the first time they saw each other as equals, not opponents. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with warm colors, Rhea stood with her arms crossed, watching the horizon. Jackson walked over, stopping at a respectful distance. "You run this ranch well," he said. "And you work well," she replied. Their words were simple, but they carried weight. Two strong people, each used to standing alone, had finally found someone they didn't have to guard themselves against. Neither said it out loud, but both felt it. Something had shifted between them. A quiet respect had formed, a respect that neither of them knew would grow into something deeper in the days ahead. The days that followed felt different for everyone at the Carson Ranch, especially for Rhea and Jackson. Something small had changed between them, nothing dramatic or loud. Just a quiet shift that others could sense, even if they couldn't explain it. They worked together more easily, spoke with fewer barriers, and understood each other in a way that silently surprised them both. Rhea found herself noticing things she usually overlooked. She noticed how Jackson arrived early every morning, sometimes even before the sun rose, standing by the corral with Willow tied nearby. He always checked the animals with calm focus, running his hand softly along a horse's neck or adjusting a gait with thoughtful care. It showed he took pride in even the simplest tasks. She noticed how little he talked about himself. He wasn't hiding anything. He simply wasn't the type to talk without purpose. When he did speak, his words held honesty. He had no interest in bragging or trying to impress people. Jackson, on the other hand, noticed Rhea's strength in new ways. He saw that she guided her team not by demanding respect, but by earning it every day. She didn't seek praise. She didn't show off. She worked harder than anyone else and didn't step back from any responsibility. When a task became difficult, she faced it head-on with the determination of someone who had learned to carry both her burdens and her dreams with equal weight. And yet, beneath that strength, Jackson began to see something else, something softer that most people never noticed. He saw the way her eyes softened when she checked on the younger animals. He saw the small, almost hidden smiles she gave when a worker did something right. He saw how she paused at sunset to appreciate the quiet beauty of her land. Those moments revealed a side of her that didn't show up in town gossip or bold descriptions. One warm evening, Rhea walked out toward the far fields, taking her usual end-of-day rounds. Jackson had finished checking the fence line earlier and decided to take a slow walk too. The air carried a gentle stillness, the kind that felt peaceful after hours of work. He spotted Rhea by the fence, leaning slightly against a post while watching the field. "Long day?" Jackson asked as he approached. Rhea glanced at him and nodded. "But a good one." He stood beside her, not too close, just enough to share the quiet moment. They watched the horses grazing, their tails swaying lazily. The sky above them shimmered with orange and gold, slowly changing into deeper shades. "You ever get tired of all this?" Jackson asked softly. Rhea took a slow breath. "The work? No. The responsibility? Sometimes. But this ranch, it's home. I'd rather carry the weight of something I love than stay comfortable with something I don't." Creeply. Creeply ranches. Creeply ranches. Creeply weighted. Creeply weighted. Creeply weighted. Creeply weighted. Creeply weighted. Jackson understood that in a way few others could. "Makes sense," he said. She looked at him, noticing how his calm presence eased her thoughts. "You plan to stay long?" she asked. Jackson hesitated. He had never planned to stay in one place for more than a handful of weeks. Staying too long made him feel trapped, like the world was asking him for something he wasn't ready to give. But this ranch felt different, and Rhea made it feel different. "I'm not in a hurry to leave," he finally answered. Rhea didn't show surprise, but inside, something warm settled quietly. The next few days brought even more understanding between them. One morning, Rhea found Jackson teaching one of the younger ranch hands how to properly guide a stubborn calf. The boy had been struggling for days, becoming frustrated with himself. Jackson spoke gently, showing him where to stand, how to move his hands, and when to step back. "Don't rush," Jackson told him. "Sometimes the animals take longer to trust you." Rhea watched from a distance, impressed not by Jackson's skill, she already knew he was capable, but by his patience. It showed her a side of him she hadn't seen yet. Later that afternoon, Rhea asked him, "Where did you learn to be so patient?" Jackson smiled lightly. "When you spend years alone, you learn to slow down. Nothing much comes from rushing through life." Rhea nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I should learn that too." He looked at her with warm eyes. "You're better at it than you think." Their conversations grew a little deeper each day. Not dramatic or emotional, but sincere in a quiet, honest way that felt natural. They shared small stories from their pasts, not everything, just the parts they trusted the other to hear. Rhea told him how she took over the ranch when her father grew weak. She explained how people doubted her at first, but learned quickly not to underestimate her. Jackson listened with genuine respect. Jackson told her about the miles he had traveled and the places he had seen. He spoke about how difficult it was for him to depend on people after being let down so often in his youth. Rhea didn't judge him. She understood the feeling of carrying everything alone. One evening, after a long day repairing fences, a small group of workers gathered by the barn to share light conversation. Rhea joined them for a moment, leaning against a haystack. Jackson arrived a few minutes later, wiping dust from his hands. "Good work today," Rhea said to him. "You too," he replied. One of the workers, an older man named Samuel, grinned and said, "You two work better together than most folks who've known each other for years." Rhea and Jackson exchanged a brief look, but neither argued. Samuel wasn't wrong. After a few more busy days, Rhea found herself facing a decision she hadn't expected. Jackson had become an important part of the ranch in a short time. He handled tasks with skill, made others work better simply by example, and brought a sense of calm strength that the ranch had been missing. She didn't want to lose that. But more than that, she didn't want to lose him. One evening, she saw him tightening his saddle straps, preparing Willow for the next day's work. She walked over, trying not to let her thoughts show too quickly. "You know," she said slowly, "I've had a lot of cowboys work here over the years." Jackson nodded, listening quietly. Some left because the work was too much. Some stayed only for the pay. Some tried to impress me, and some didn't try at all. She paused. "But you're different. You work with purpose. You help without expecting anything." Jackson stopped adjusting the saddle and looked at her with honest eyes. "You're different too, Rhea. This ranch stands because of you. You don't ask for attention, but you earn respect everywhere you go." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the evening breeze brushing past them softly. Neither of them needed fancy words or dramatic confessions. The understanding was already there. Quiet, steady, and real. Rhea took a small breath. "If you want to stay here longer, I'd like that." Jackson didn't smile widely, but his eyes softened. "I'd like to stay." It was not a promise trapped in complicated emotions. It was a simple agreement between two strong individuals who finally found a place and a person they didn't want to walk away from. From that day on, life at the Carson Ranch continued the same in many ways but felt changed in others. The work remained hard, the days long, and the challenges steady. But now, Rhea and Jackson faced everything together, not as two people stubbornly standing alone, but as a team that understood each other deeply. The workers noticed the difference too. The ranch felt more balanced, more grounded, more alive. Rhea still led with strength, and Jackson still worked with steady patience. But now, when the sun set and the day ended, they sometimes found themselves walking toward the horizon together, quietly sharing stories or simply enjoying the soft colors of the sky. Neither of them rushed into anything more. They didn't need to. What they had was real. And real things grow in their own time. The cowboy who once believed he didn't need anyone had finally met someone who matched his strength, his quietness, and his spirit. And the fearless frontier woman who bowed to no one had finally found someone she didn't have to stand apart from. Together, without losing themselves, they found something they never expected, something steady, respectful, calm, and deeply meaningful. Something that felt like home.